Hello everyone, thank you very much for coming and welcome to the annual meeting of the New Champions 2017 where we're talking about inclusive growth in the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you also for coming to this press conference where we're launching PwC's report on the macroeconomic impact of artificial intelligence. So very appropriate for the meeting. We're going to hear from our two speakers over the next few minutes, and afterwards, I think we'll go to some Q&A. This session is filmed and webcast live, so you can also see it at wef.ch. You also have copies of the report, I believe, on your chairs. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my speakers. On my immediate left is Anand Rao. He's Principal US Advisory and Global Leader on Artificial Intelligence. And you have your PhD, I understand, in Artificial Intelligence. And also, I'm delighted to be joined by Jim Woods, who's a leader in Global Risk Assurance at PwC in Hong Kong. Thank you very much. Anand, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Maxwell. So what we have done in PwC is been working for a few months now to essentially create a report on artificial intelligence. We have approached it with a very broad definition of artificial intelligence that includes automation as well as includes how augmentation would work, how people will be enabled by AI systems. So we have looked at it globally, and we have also looked at it across 8 major sectors. And we have published the results, and you should have both the paper as well as the press briefing related to that. This is just the start of what we are going to be publishing for the next year or so, where we are going to do deeper dive into artificial intelligence in multiple sectors, as well as artificial intelligence in various functional areas like finance or HR and other areas. So just to give you the highlights of the study, the first and foremost is we are calling it the size of the prize. So what is the market size for artificial intelligence? And when we look at the market size, we are saying by 2030, so 13 years from now, AI will be $15.7 trillion. So that's a huge market, almost 14% of GDP. So that's the headline number. So it's a big market, again, as I said, within the broader definition of artificial intelligence. The next is to just look at where is that 15.7 trillion coming from? So what is driving that number? I would say there are 2 things that artificial intelligence is going to be doing in the economy. One is very much driving productivity growth. As we think about automating some of the manual, routine, and even cognitive tasks, more and more efficiency will come into the system, and that will lead to better productivity. And that is going to increase the overall GDP as we start reinvesting that productivity gain. So 40% of that 15.7 trillion is going to come from productivity increases. The other 60% of the total is actually going to be driven by greater consumption. As we have seen already in many areas, artificial intelligence is leading to a lot of personalization, which leads to better recommendations and better adoption of various technologies and various things that we do in terms of music, video, and so on. So that is going to drive greater consumption, and we believe that 60% of that growth will come from consumption and 40% will come from productivity. So this is taking the headline number and then breaking it into 2 parts, productivity increase and consumption. Then now if you look at what happens at the next level, we looked at multiple sectors on which sectors would gain the most growth, and we came up with healthcare, automotive technologies, retail as being the primary beneficiaries of productivity gains, and financial services would essentially gain as well in terms of consumption. So those are the 4 major sectors that are going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. The last and another major finding from our report is very specific to China. As we looked at the global GDP and looked at every sector, what we were also able to find out is by 2030, the impact of artificial intelligence on China is going to be really huge, and in fact bigger than even the US market. So this might come as a surprise. So it's obviously a growing market, even though artificial intelligence will impact the US economy much earlier than in China. If you take the date of 2030, the impact on China will be much higher than the impact of AI in US. So $7 trillion in China by 2030 versus 3.7 trillion in US. So again, that's a major result in terms of just the benefits of AI flowing into the Chinese economy. So that's what I wanted to basically convey as the key things: the size of the price essentially being split up into productivity gains and consumption gains happening in the 4 major sectors, and of course China being one of the primary beneficiaries of AI-led growth.
Thank you. Jim, what are some of the biggest challenges for businesses looking to adopt AI?
Sure. I think Anand's talked about the significant potential and upside of AI. We do see a significant lack of trust and confidence, though, in terms of realizing that upside. And there's a number of factors causing that lack of trust in terms of risk, perceived fear, and skepticism. Some of those, clearly, in terms of AI technology, relative to perhaps some of the more traditional technologies, it's more of a black box in terms of it's not as intuitive to know how the AI is working in terms of that artificial intelligence, and therefore in terms of the outcomes, the basis for decisions. So again, that is a factor that a lot of stakeholders are concerned about. When we think about within an organization, there's a fear of jobs, for example, or the labor force being taken over by technology. There are the risk of unconscious bias being built into the algorithms as well, leading to perhaps perverse outcomes down the line from that unconscious bias. So alongside the report in terms of looking at the growth potential or the impact on businesses going forward, we've also released a responsible AI framework, which is designed to provide a framework for corporations, for stakeholders to think about their AI strategy going forward. We've set out probably 3 key aspects to that. The first is around the strategy and making sure that organizations have a joined up, coordinated plan as part of a broader digital transformation. We're thinking here, when we think about AI, it has probably 2 components. One is the customization of products and services from a consumer perspective. The second is within an organization around automation and assisting with productivity around the back office. So making sure that that strategy is well designed, there's a proper governance and oversight framework. Boards perhaps have one person who's assigned to oversee the IA strategy, or indeed have a center of excellence within an organization. It's incredibly important to have that confidence from the outset. The second area is in terms of the design and development of your AI program and tools, is to make sure at the outset that there's rigorous testing, that controls are built in from the outset to the AI, perhaps that maybe hardwire some red flags such that to the extent the AI goes beyond accepted tolerance, it can be cut off and controlled. And in that regard, having perhaps a modular approach such that if issues arise in due course, you don't have to shut down your whole platform. Whatever it is that's sustaining your AI, you can have a modularized approach to that. And then the third area, after the sort of the design and development, is really your ongoing assurance and confidence that your AI is not going rogue. We know in today's world, cybersecurity and hacking is a major topic. In the area of AI, perhaps we refer to adversarial attacks, which basically come in and lead to perhaps shifts in the learning of the AI technology that may lead to perverse outcomes. And so being able to monitor the outcomes of your AI as over the course of doing business is imperative, so you can catch any anomalies early. So they're really the three key themes that we're recommending as part of our responsible framework to AI to help give companies and other stakeholders, employees, trust and confidence in this technology.
And when we were speaking earlier, you were also talking about the sort of the regulatory framework and the sort of need for clarity there. Jim, perhaps you can maybe sort of elaborate a little on that, and maybe.
Regulators are just another stakeholder group, and like many of us, regulators are struggling to keep up with the pace of change, the pace of technological advancement, and therefore making sure that one is properly engaging with stakeholders and being transparent in terms of the design and how you're managing your AI technology, your governance is absolutely critical because obviously down the line, if something goes wrong, that plays to reputation.
Yeah, of course.
Anand, that's right,
yes.
yeah. So artificial intelligence or AI has sort of very far-reaching impact on multiple areas. So we think of it very much from a consumer perspective. How should a consumer be protected? As Jim was just saying, the notion of bias. You don't want to build that into the system, or you want to prevent biases being introduced by AI. So that's at a consumer level. But then you also have enterprises. So we are talking to enterprises as to how do you release safe AI, right? So responsible AI. So how do you make sure that some of these things don't happen? So that's at the enterprise level. So then you go at a national level. What can the governments do to make sure that they facilitate the adoption of AI, at the same time don't have any of these rogue elements that we are talking about come into the overall ecosystem of AI? And then lastly, it's also societal. So as a society, we need to accept what we want of these AI and how we want to interact with AI. So it's at all levels AI is going to have an impact. And then as a firm, we are looking into how do we make sure that all of those things come together so that the size of the prize that we are putting forward would actually be realized.
You mentioned bias earlier. Can you give an example of what you mean by that?
Yeah. So the way bias comes into AI and not into, let's say, software. In software, it's essentially coded by the person, and you can hold the person responsible if they did something wrong in terms of the code, right? So there's someone responsible who wrote the requirements and say that person didn't do it. Now with AI, what is happening is no one is actually writing the rules for whether you grant, let's say, a mortgage to person X or not. That is being done, if you like, using a machine learning system. So the machine learning system is being fed with data, and it's that if the data is somehow biased with respect to one group of people, then the software gets biased. So that's how bias gets into garbage in, garbage out, or if it is biased data coming in, the machine learns something really biased.
And I think that's why it's critical in terms of the design stage to make sure there's a diverse input to the development of the artificial intelligence, so that bias is mitigated or minimized to the maximum extent possible. Whether it be gender, multicultural input, and not just one particular group in terms of developing the AI.
And do you feel that all the sort of mindsets need to change either at the sort of level of individuals or companies or multinational organizations or even governments as well? What's your sort of advice or message there?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of mindset, I would say the mindset that most of us have today is man versus machine, right? So either we think that machines are our slaves, so we can get them to do whatever they're good at, or sometimes it goes on the other side. Some of these machines, we are going to be slaves to the machines, and the machines are going to rule, right? So, but the truth is, neither of those, they are neither our slaves, nor are we their slaves. What we see as the future is that the man and machine together is better than either one, even just as a human, because the AI can digest so much of information that we physically can't, even as individuals or even as a society. So we should really be using them. And in that sense, I think it requires a mindset shift where we are talking about how can we make use of AI to make our lives better, right? And inclusive of all the growth, and not only just individually, but as a society, how can we make all of our lives better using AI rather than either shunning AI or treating us as slaves to the AI.
And in terms of sort of how people think about or manage risk, what sort of mindsets are you trying to encourage?
I think I would say a sense of healthy skepticism.
Okay.
Because I think if any of us, if you think about our children today, the digital natives, this isn't a case of if, it's more a case of when. We can talk about timelines and have different points of view, how quickly particular technologies will happen. But I think in terms of the trend line, these technologies are coming, and with greater and greater processing power, that is going to lead to more advanced technologies. So it's not unbridled enthusiasm and naivety. I think it is important that there's skepticism. In terms of that mindset, it's one of making sure that appropriate controls are put in place, that appropriate governance is put in place to manage and deliver ultimately trust and confidence. I mean, that is the key issue that I'd come back to. Seeking to engender trust and transparency around AI will be the way that will not only manage the downside, but also reap the upside and the potential that Anand referred to earlier.
Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. So, gentleman on the front here. Can we get a microphone to him? And there's a gentleman on the back row there as well.
Okay, thank you. From China Central Television.
Oh, could you? Sorry.
China Central Television.
Okay.
My question is about we have different various types of AI. So, what are the different features, or we call different advantages for different regions when they develop AI in the next 20 years?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from Bloomberg News. Could you just maybe detail where
Could you just say your name as well? Sorry.
Enda Curran from Bloomberg News.
Okay.
If you could just detail maybe where some of the productivity gains would be, and the ultimate figure that you've come up with, is that a net gain figure? Have you factored in potential employment losses and potential downside from AI as well, and you've come out with a net gain, or how have you come up with this figure in overall sense? Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe answer that one first, the first question. So in terms of the different types of AI and where some of the some AIs may be more applicable to some regions. Yes, we do look at AI in very different ways. We look at it in 4 fundamental ways. One where there is no human in the loop, which is more around automation on one side, but also handing complete control on autonomous intelligence or autonomous cars, autonomous intelligence on one side. And then where the human is in the loop, where we talk about assisted intelligence and where machine learning comes into play and called augmented. So if you look at all those 4 pieces, different areas of the economy as well as sectors might adopt things very differently. Let me give you an example. If you are in a developed country and if you said an AI is going to look at all the images and give you a diagnosis on what you should be doing, people will say, why do I need an AI? I want to go into the physician and talk to the person. But if you are someone in Africa where there is no access to healthcare, then having an AI which can even at least be the first filter pointing you in the right direction might be a huge help. So in that sense, so you could see certain types of technology take over more fast in some territories, as we have seen in some of the other innovations that have happened. So I would say, yes, we would see some technology, some AI technologies become more predominant in some areas versus the others. Again, regulation also comes into play in terms of how much a certain market is regulated and how much of that information is more freely made available for people to use. That might also dictate how people are using that information. So AI, at the end of the day, is taking lots of data and then generating those insights. So to the extent that I can use that data, I'll generate the right AI. But if the data is somehow deficient, then I can't provide that data. So that's the one that we're talking about. So to answer your question, in terms of what we looked at, it is the overall definition of AI is sort of very broad. So let me give an example. If you look at Internet of Things, so yes, Internet of Things, and of course there's a lot of potential for Internet of Things. People have projected various numbers for Internet of Things. And if you take Internet of Things, yes, it's going to provide a lot of data, but for Internet of Things to be really viable, you need to somehow take that data and make sense out of it. So there, we feel that AI is already coming in and will be coming into that to facilitate the growth of IoT. Take drones, for example, or augmented reality, virtual reality. Everywhere we see AI essentially feeding all of the other areas. So when we talk about this growth number, it is the overall growth of all of that. We haven't tried to disaggregate. That's purely IoT from a hardware perspective. This is the AI software that runs it. So this is the overall impact. What it doesn't take into account, to answer your second question, AI has gone through ups and downs. We are in the sort of the third phase of AI. So, and there's been a lot of excitement, and then things have died down. So there could potentially be another like a dot-com burst, so you might have an AI burst. We haven't accounted for that. So we haven't accounted for AI picking off and then going bust and then starting again. So that's something that we haven't taken into account. Also, as we looked at the economic projections, we are not factoring in other changes to the geopolitical situation and global situation in terms of trade, globalization. I know there are lots of things that are happening around. So this is essentially projecting from what we have seen in the past without accounting for any other potential change that could happen.
Jim, did you have any, because we were talking a bit earlier on sort of on productivity gains, did you have anything to add on?
I mean, I guess something we didn't touch on earlier was around data integrity.
Okay.
I think that's going to be a key aspect as well. So when we think about AI, it's not just about the AI technology. It's about the integrated suite of technology that a company has, whether it be blockchain, whether it be their existing ERP platforms. And so the integrity of data that the AI is leveraging is absolutely critical. So in terms of how that's being managed, again, that's something that I think companies need to focus on.
We have a question down here.
Yeah, John Corrigan, Wall Street Journal. Yeah, can you tell us about the possible hindrance of regulatory, government oversight and regulation on the development and expansion of AI? A lot of the strategies from mapping in China, for example, to facial recognition raised concerns about privacy, national security. How could that affect the development of artificial intelligence?
Yeah. As you said, I think privacy and confidentiality of information is a big barrier to adoption. To the extent that governments can provide some of that regulatory framework, we feel that the AI will flourish. And it's not just the governments, it's also, I think, the enterprises and how much they can assure the customers on how they are going to use that data, where they are going to use that data, whether there is a value exchange for people sharing that data. again, I think those are definitely barriers for AI. And to the extent what we see happening, at least in some areas, is as far as the customers see the value, they are prepared to share that information for a specific purpose, not for a very broad purpose. So that's what we are seeing in our research. And how that attitude changes over time would, I think, help the AI. On a slightly different note, in terms of regulation, the regulators are also looking at the benefits versus the costs. So for example, if you look at autonomous cars, yes, there are risks associated with autonomous cars, but there are 23,000 people dying on the roads of US, at least just one country. And can you reduce that? And is that reduction in the number of lives lost, can that be made equal with a little bit of sharing of that information, right? So they're looking at both the positive and the negative side to come up with a regulation. And I'm sure same thing happens with facial recognition with respect to, do you want to allow for or be cognizant of more terrorist activity, or do you want to share that data? So there's always the plus and minus. And the extent to which I think the society accepts some of these and the government sort of regulates some of these things would definitely impact the numbers that we are sharing.
I think ultimately I go back to the point on transparency with regulators. I mean, we're seeing it in our own industry, in the professional services industry, and the many companies going back to, in terms of their internal labour force, back office, looking to automate, looking to leverage artificial intelligence around perhaps some of the more routine tasks. Being transparent and engaging with your regulator is a critical component of managing those stakeholder groups, as well as your employees, to allay their concerns, and again, being able to articulate to your customers what you're doing to provide them with the confidence. So I think transparency, engagement in the community is very, very important to building that trust.
And just sort of add on to what Jim was saying, I think there are a number of major programs that the government is initiating. DARPA has initiated something called explainable AI. So have the AI, but have another AI explain the logic of the AI to a common man, right? So it's not based on you need a PhD to understand the explanation. It should be a common person. If they are denied a mortgage, would the AI be able to give an explanation which is acceptable to a common man? So that's the kind of research that's going on that will bring in more of that transparency into what the algorithm is doing, so that people can trust the explanation as much as they trust a human being when they make that explanation.
Question on the front here?
Hello.
We have about 1 or 2 minutes left.
All right. I'm Viola. I'm from TMT Post, Time 80. So my question is kind of follow up the last question. Like to design a good and non-biased AI is kind of hard, especially when the general public and the government, even most of the government, they don't actually understand the potential of it. So so the talent pool of the AI is quite small. So how do you think we could address this in the near future? I mean.
Yeah. I think in terms of how we take the AI or adopt the AI, I think it's going to be much more based on a slow progression. So it's not going to be immediately accept everything that's happening, and that's why you're seeing some of those programs. In terms of the talent of AI, one of the things that the community is addressing is again, more people being educated in AI, but also more and more of the AI algorithms are being made open source by some of the large players. So that is essentially creating a larger pool of people who can understand what is going on from an algorithm perspective. And that's something that many consortiums are coming together as well to make sure that the AI development is transparent and it's not one lab doing something which no one else knows what it is about, right? So there's more of that openness slowly coming in. Of course, companies still exist to make profits and survive and flourish. So it's that goal versus trying to make AI open.
But I think that open ecosystem, many companies today are looking at alliances as opposed to acquisitions in this area. So we talk about the shared economy, we talk about the Uberization of the world today. That limited labor pool in this area, I think, is being shared much more than perhaps traditional technologies. So I think companies are really struggling to recruit talent into their company, so they're looking at partnerships. These technologies we're talking about are so specialized and with multiple niche use cases, it's impractical for any one corporation to own all of the capability. So entering into joint ventures, strategic alliances is a way to tap into that limited resource pool.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.